I was so looking forward to going to Large Club Conference when I was president-elect. Mine was in Toronto, and we had the royal carpet being rolled out. And how appropriate in lieu of having the people from the Columbus Public Health Department here today. A week before my trip, the entire conference was canceled because of SARS. Do you remember SARS? This was 2004-ish, and so just the chances of flying and everybody getting sick were so bad they canceled everything. So I didn't get to go. But anyway, today we have not one but two speakers. Amy is amazing. She was feeling sick yesterday and called me at home and said, Mike, I don't know if I'm getting sick or not, but I still want to make sure that we present tomorrow, and I've got a colleague that is involved in these initiatives with me, and she's going to cover me. But then here Amy is. She feels better. But after she'd already extended the invitation to her friend Melissa, we're going to get to hear from both of them. So I'll introduce Amy and Melissa here to you. Amy is Amy O'Grady. She's the former Director of Criminal Justice Initiatives for the Ohio Attorney General, Mike DeWine, and she's the former Deputy Director of Professional Standards for the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy. Started a few months ago as a Senior Policy Analyst for Columbus City Council, where she will oversee city and county efforts to fight this epidemic. She does work for City Council, but the county is also paying part of her salary. In 2016, 4,100 Ohioans died from overdosing on heroin or other synthetic relatives. It is estimated Franklin County had a 66% increase from 2017 over 2016 with overdose deaths. O'Grady has worked in the Ohio Attorney General's office since 2005, took a break in 2013 and 14 when she was appointed as a judge in the 10th District Court of Appeals. She now steers the joint Franklin County Columbus Task Force that will fight against the heroin and opioid epidemic that is killing people, destroying families, and costing millions of dollars. They've developed a plan, along with the Franklin County Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board, with an $80 million annual budget, $57 million of which comes from our Franklin County property taxes. The plan calls for getting more treatment and support for addicts, helping first responders and law enforcement officers treat addicts more quickly, and educating the community to help aid prevention. A large part of the plan is to add to the number of treatment beds, a major concern of our frustrated medics who often oversee overdose victims leave the hospital because they don't have enough beds. Amy went to Kent State University and earned a BA in criminal justice and then went to Capitol Law School. In her spare time, she's involved with the Huckleberry House, the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Ohio, the Ohio Jail Advisory Board, and the Supreme Court of Ohio Advisory Committee on Mental Illness in the courts. Melissa has a really cool title. Listen to this. She is the Harm Reduction Program Manager. The Harm Reduction Program Manager for the Columbus Public Health Department. And so Melissa and Amy are going to present to us. Please help me welcome to Columbus Rotary.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Amy O'Grady. I work for Columbus City Attorney Zach Klein, and we're pleased to be here today to talk with you about the efforts that we have happening here in Franklin County to address the drug epidemic plaguing our communities. You'll hear more about the Franklin County Opioid Action Plan later, but Melissa and I thought it would be best to start with a brief description about addiction, what it is, some statistics, and how we got here. So I'm going to start with Melissa.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me today. I think it's very important that we have a really good understanding of what's actually happening out there in the county and in the city around us before we can really start to begin to unpack reasons why the Franklin County Opioid Action Plan is such a unique opportunity to make a big difference in the city and in the county, and potentially set an example for other parts of the United States as well. Is this working? Perfect. All right. So in public health, we talk about this a lot, and probably many of you in here today have heard somebody say that addiction is a chronic, relapsing brain disease. It's not a disease or a deficit of somebody's character. It is an actual disease of the brain. When someone is exposed to opiates or any substance for a long period of time, that substance actually affects not just the way your brain functions, but it also actually changes your brain structurally, which is what contributes to the long-term effect of addiction on the brain. That's why we call it a chronic disease. I'm going to get a little bit more into that later. So on the PowerPoint here, you can see there's lots of different types of opiate drugs. Probably a lot of people in this room have been prescribed an opiate pain pill at one point or another. A lot of people aren't aware, though, the very strong opiates like a morphine or an Oxycontin, the actual chemical structure of those drugs is very, very similar to the chemical structure of heroin. And so those drugs are very, very addictive and can be very deadly to the individual. A lot of people also aren't aware that about 4 out of every 5 people who's currently addicted to heroin today first started by taking a prescription opiate pain pill. So in a lot of ways, this heroin crisis, the opiate crisis that we're in right now, is actually starting in our own medicine cabinets, and we might not even be aware of that. Now we're seeing increased numbers of people dying, not just here in Franklin County, but across the United States, and that's largely attributed to the fact that our illicit drug supply has become very contaminated with fentanyl and carfentanil. If you're not aware, fentanyl is about 100 times stronger than morphine, and carfentanil is 100 times stronger than fentanyl, which, if my math is right, and I wish it wasn't, that means that fentanyl is 10,000 times stronger than morphine, and it doesn't take very much to send somebody immediately into accidental overdose. So I'm not sure if you can actually see that from my angle. That graphic is a little bit difficult to see, but in the United States, we've got about 21 million people at any given time that are addicted to a substance, which means about 1 out of 7 individuals in the United States is dealing with a substance use disorder. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a scope of what we're dealing with right here. At a national level, we're still kind of sifting through our data from 2017, but across the United States, just in 2016, there were 64,000 people that died of accidental overdose death, which, to put that in perspective for you, there was about 58,000 people who died, U.S. soldiers who died during the Vietnam War. So we've exceeded that figure. The rate of people overdosing fatally in the United States is higher than the rates of people dying in motor vehicle accidents. So it's a very, very significant problem. Now, where does Ohio stack up in that? We don't stack up great. About 1 out of every 9 accidental overdose deaths that occurs in the United States occurs in the state of Ohio. And that's typically not the chart that anyone really wants to be at the top of. So then looking at Franklin County, what does that mean for us? About 2 people a day in Franklin County are dying of accidental overdose death. So it's a significant problem here. Since we really started looking at the opiate crisis in 2003, there's been a 423% increase in accidental overdose death, and that's here locally in Franklin County. There's also been collateral damage associated with that, increased rates of hepatitis C. Just this year, our Franklin County coroner reported that in the first 6 months of this year, we've seen an 88% increase compared to the same time last year of fatal overdose death. So it's a significant problem here at home. A lot of people ask me this question all the time. Why, if we know that our drug supply is polluted and we know that our drug supply is so dangerous, why are people continuing to do it? And I alluded to this earlier, and that's where the changes in your brain come into play here. So I'm going to talk about this for just a brief minute, and I'm not a scientist, and I bet looking at this crowd there might be a couple scientists in the room, so I apologize in advance for the simplistic version of the science that I'm about to give you here. But because of the way that addiction affects your brain, your thought processes are essentially rewired. Your brain, so to speak, is hijacked by this addiction. And the way that your brain is hijacked is both in those functional changes and in the structural changes. So once you are exposed to an opiate drug for a long period of time, the need to use that drug becomes a compulsive behavior that feels very similar to the need to breathe. And with breathing, you don't even think about it until the time that you're deprived of oxygen. So probably some of you people in this room have experienced this before. Has anyone ever been trapped underwater? Maybe you were on a raft that got flipped over. Maybe you got sucked under a wave at the shore. Maybe you were like me in the summer of 1997 and your brother held you under the water at the swimming pool. Whatever it might be, you're underwater for a few seconds too long and your brain starts functioning the way it's supposed to. It starts firing off these signals throughout the rest of your body, alerting you to the fact that you're being deprived of oxygen. And so your number one concern becomes addressing the imminent danger, the impending doom of running out of air. And so you start kicking and screaming, your body goes into emergency response, fight or flight mode to get to that oxygen. So those are the same exact signals that start firing off in the brain of someone who's addicted to opiates that's going through withdrawal. Their body goes into an emergency alert system. They have this compulsive need to use that substance that feels very, very similar, exactly like the need to breathe. And that's really scary because when that person's experiencing that, they're not thinking about the potential risk that they're putting themselves or other people around them in when they're using that substance. Their number one concern is the immediate danger, which is using that substance. And that sounds really scary, and it is very scary, but that's not what scares me the most about addiction. What scares me the most is the actual structural changes that occur in the brain, the changes in the size and shapes of your prefrontal cortex and the gray matter. And it's those changes that actually cause those functional effects. And so I like to use the example a couple years ago. It was on Valentine's Day, actually. I fell down the stairs and I broke my leg. It was a really romantic trip to the hospital. And I had to have 6 screws and a plate put in. I wasn't able to bear any weight for about 3 months. It took 9 months of rehabilitation. It's been 3 years, and today, on rainy mornings like today, it still aches. When I run on it, it still swells up. And that's because I had a major structural change, a traumatic structural injury that occurred in the bone of my leg that changed the way that it was able to function. And so when we think about opiate addiction and the changes that occur in the brain of someone who's addicted to opiates, we can't just think about it in terms of stopping that drug use. The danger that that person's in exists long after they stop using that substance, and that's kind of the driving factor behind this crisis. It's very difficult to overcome. It takes a lot of time and rehabilitation to be able to rewire those structures in your brain. So now that you have that understanding, I'm going to invite Amy up, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about why the Opiate Action Plan is going to be addressing some of these issues.
So why not everybody? You know, I've often asked this, you know, but we've seen people that have taken oxycodone or Vicodin or drank alcohol. It affects people different ways. This is such an individualized disease. You know, what may affect you one way if you take, you know, a pill or a drug may affect somebody else another way. It really depends on different factors, and in large part genetics. You know, there's some research that shows that, you know, as much of half of a person's makeup, you know, of genetic makeup really, you know, plays a role in whether or not they would become addicted to drugs or alcohol. So it's genetics. It's also environmental factors. You know, it's, you know, are drugs normalized in their community? You know, do you look at poverty, look at crime, you know, look at just the way that things are ran in their household. And it's also the individual themselves. How, you know, what type of access do they have to drugs or alcohol? How do they deal with their emotions? It really depends on that individual person whether or not they would, you know, become or succumb to addiction. But addiction is treatable. You know, we've seen brain scans for individuals who are addicted to meth that after about 14 months of sobriety, their brains are really starting to show progress. We have really come a long way when it comes to treatment modalities and other means, to get people access to care. There are things that we are doing that we did not know years ago or even months ago. And the one thing that I will stress to you, though, is it's not just about getting somebody in for a 30-day stay. If you get somebody into treatment, that's one part of the equation. It's a chronic relapsing brain disease. You have to have this ongoing, year by year, support system to make sure that somebody has an understanding of what they need to do to stay clean. This is called a recovery-oriented system of care, and basically these are supports that somebody would need to surround themselves with in order to stay clean. This includes a job, a house, all of those basic needs that you and I don't even think about, or maybe don't even take advantage of, when you're thinking about why somebody, may decide to take that drink if they lose their job or lose their home, or maybe don't have clothes to be able to, put on their kids to go to school. And those are things that may cause somebody to go down the road of addiction. And these are things that may be able to help them get back as long as they have those supports. So it takes somebody probably about 3 to 5 years, along with the proper supports, to really have a good chance to stay down the road of sobriety. So knowing all this, what the city and the county decided to do last June was to develop the Franklin County Opioid Action Plan. And it's a collaboration between city and county agencies for the next 3 years to work on a number of action items in various subject matters. So we can, make some efforts to see what we can do to address the opioid crisis in our community. The plan is divided into a number of topic areas, and we meet on a monthly basis to see what we can, do to work with within our communities and just make progress. The Adam H. Board met with, a number of folks, to come up with the plan itself. So they definitely, took in the input of the community. We got some, information to talk about, not just what we could do for treatment, but also for first responders, for our children, for making sure that, we can get some assistance for, people who are in recovery. We thought about all aspects of this plan, and what we're doing now is we're putting it to action. So I want to give you a couple of examples of some things that we're working on. In our prevention and community education subgroup, we're working on a brochure so parents and caregivers can talk to their kids about drugs and other risky behaviors. We divided it into age groups so parents and caregivers can feel comfortable starting those conversations, because oftentimes those are really uncomfortable, and we want to make sure that those conversations are happening early and often. In our healthcare and risk reduction subcommittee, we're talking about drug take-back days, which Melissa will talk with you about later on today, and how important it is to get that medication out of your medicine cabinets. In our treatment and support subcommittee, we talk about how we can get everybody access to treatment in the community. There are many individuals out there that don't have a clear understanding about how to get access to good treatment and don't understand that treatment continuum that I explained and about the supports that are needed to stay sober. Our first responders and law enforcement subcommittee, boy, our first responders' roles have changed so much. We're now in a role where we see so many times that first responders have had to turn into, almost social workers, where they've had to learn how to respond to somebody differently that may be in a room throwing plates at their spouse, that may be sitting at the edge of then differently than somebody who may be sitting at the edge of a bridge depressed. And they have to learn how to de-escalate those situations. And when safety isn't an issue, take them to the appropriate treatment facilities. And they learned how to do so long ago with mental health, and now they're doing so with addiction. It is a very tough situation for them. They're carrying naloxone, which Melissa will talk about later. Naloxone will help has helped revive countless individuals who have overdosed as a result of the opioid crisis. And it's a drug that basically has brought people back to life who maybe have not been in a situation and where they had thought that they would have a second chance. And oftentimes, when those folks are brought back to life, they come up and they don't want to get additional help. And those law enforcement officers are met with people who are angry and just unhappy and not ready for that additional treatment. So it's a hard job, but we're working with our law enforcement and first responders to see what we can do to provide those supports. And our Recovery and Community Engagement Subcommittee wasn't something that was originally thought about when the plan was originally drafted. But the plan talks about so many avenues that we wanted to hit on where we were working with groups in the community such as yours. And we wanted the action plan to really allow for, the community to have a voice back to the plan so we can hear about your needs. So basically, we created this group to learn about any type of, issues that you may be foreseeing, things that we may not be focusing on. This plan is a blueprint, but it's certainly not something that we're tied to. We're ready to expand it in any way, shape, or form that we need to, and that's what this group focuses on. We have a large part of involvement in the faith community. We're involving our churches to not only reach out to our youth, but also to reach out to our families. There are often times that our families are in need because their loved one has overdosed, and they may not feel comfortable talking to anybody. Oftentimes, our faith community has helped when individuals have needed transportation or other means, when you have somebody who is, in the midst of treatment and may need, just some gaps in services that, that they could be helpful and help meeting that need. I think that there's, a large part of this plan that we look to that we're still building, and that's why, we wanted to reach out to you today to say, we take your input and we need your feedback, when it comes to what you're seeing with the drug epidemic. And that's why we wanted to talk with you in large part about the Corporate Advisory Council. The plan talks about a Corporate Advisory Council, and in large part this plan, contemplated the connection between the business community and the opioid problem. We have many folks who are trying to get a job who can't pass a drug test, who are in a position where, because they, are addicted to some type of opioid or other drug, that they can't get up and go to work. Or we have individuals who, go to work and maybe their family members may have some type of addiction or illness. I read somewhere that, there's a large part of lost productivity that's, happening in the United States because of the opioid epidemic. And, we wanted to make sure that we responded to that and that we were receptive to business needs. So we formed this Corporate Advisory Council. We're meeting on January 30th to talk about that. We have a number of businesses that are interested in learning about what they could do to be more receptive to the needs of their employees, how they can respond when they may have an employee or a family member that suffers from substance use disorder, and what they could do to get them help. There are so many connections in the community that we wanted to make sure that you are aware of. So between the reduction in the stigma surrounding addiction and making sure that you have access to the right resources as a business, we wanted to make sure that we had those connections for you. And we also have some good programs that we're working on that we wanted to make sure that you were aware of about the plan. So if you have a business and you'd like to come to this meeting on the 30th, it's at the Columbus Foundation, we welcome you and would love for you to be a part of it. And I'll ask Melissa to come back up to talk about what you can do.
So in addition to getting engaged in the Corporate Advisory Council, there's a couple of things that all of us can start doing today as individuals that could really make a world of difference. And the last time I was actually here at the Boathouse, I had a chance to listen to Dr. Long, our former health commissioner, stand up here and talk about the importance of carrying naloxone. And I carry it with me everywhere I go. This is naloxone. I always tell people, if you can give somebody a Flonase, you can give somebody Narcan. You just press it up and put it in someone's nose, and then they've had a chance to make it to tomorrow because of something that you were able to do today. A lot of people aren't aware. There's lots of places where you can get Narcan for free, but you can also purchase that at any pharmacy in the state of Ohio. I got mine from CVS on Parsons Avenue. I didn't have a prescription for it. I was able to use my health insurance to buy it, and it cost me a $10 copay. And to me, that's well worth it for the opportunity that I might have someday to save a life. A second way, a very simple way that you could help prevent someone from becoming addicted to a substance, or potentially remove a temptation for someone who might currently be struggling with a substance use disorder, is to get rid of those medications out of your medicine cabinets. You could bring them. There's drop boxes all around Franklin County. There are also medication take-back events that we sponsor. We have one twice a year at the health department, once in the spring and once in the fall. So our next upcoming one will be towards the end of April. You can bring your medications back there to us. And then we also have some flyers in the back teaching people how to throw away the old medications at home, so that they're not going to get into the hands of somebody who might not want them in their possession. So I think we're going to close that out there. If anyone has any questions, we're happy. I see someone in the back. And two, yeah.
How to use it besides just shoving it up somebody's nose. Are there any side effects if you're doing it to the wrong person? They're not having.
Absolutely, yeah. So Narcan, one of our EMS person who does trainings with us all the time, he says that naloxone is one of the most effective drugs, and it's also one of the most benign. There's no side effects to naloxone. I could give it to myself right now 5 times, and I wouldn't have any interaction with it except for if I was on an opiate drug. If someone's experiencing an overdose, typically they will be passed out on the ground. They might have blue lips or blue fingernails, will have very shallow breathing if they're breathing at all. And if you suspect someone's overdosing, we always advise somebody to give them naloxone if you have it, because again, if they're not overdosing, it's not going to hurt that individual. Right before you give naloxone, make sure you call 911 and let the professionals know that there's an emergency, so that way they're on their way. You have about 4 minutes in the city of Columbus before EMS is going to arrive. So if you can administer naloxone to somebody and then have the EMS arrive shortly after, that's a significantly better chance that person's going to be able to recover. Yeah.
Do our public and parochial schools play any part in your program?
Yeah.
They do. In the not too distant future, we're going to be meeting with school superintendents to talk with them about what they can do to have more prevention efforts. I think the hard part about schools is they are put in such a position where everything's laid on them when it comes to drug efforts, and kids. And, frankly, I think, Franklin County has to take a community approach when it comes to prevention, so schools don't feel dumped on. So it can be, here's what you can do in schools, but here's what you should do at home. So it's a community effort, so we involve after-school programs, churches, schools, so schools play an integral part. And, I want schools, and then another message that we'll be giving to schools is that so they understand they don't have to create a new class. They just have to make sure that messaging is integrated throughout the classroom day, because there is no way that we want to make, this heavy enough that they have to take up time, to a point where it's daunting, and that they get, so bogged down with this, that, they feel like they can't have their tested subjects dealt with. That's not what this is about. So absolutely. Go ahead.
What time is this corporate event?
2 to 3:30. If you give me your card, I'll get you an invite. Go ahead.
What's being done on the front end or the top end with prescriptions for very serious medical procedures and things?
Well, I know the State of Ohio Board of Pharmacy, there's a law that requires doctors to look at ORS, which is the automated, system that registers, prescriptions, to make sure to see, what's been prescribed before. There's new administrative rules to make sure that that prescribing pattern is looked at in that automated system, and I believe there's a shorter time frame. I don't want to quote off the top of my head because I can't remember what it is, but I think it's 10 days for acute pain. And that's, I know that they have to, just make sure that they're following those guidelines. Now, I've been asked this before, and Melissa, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. Why can't everybody go after all these doctors? There are all these bad doctors. Our Board of Pharmacy is doing everything that they can to go after doctors and, look at prescribing patterns and see what they can do. So if you see things that don't make sense, contact your police department. Make sure that you're providing that information, because, if you're in a position where you're seeing something that just doesn't add up, they can work on what they see, but they will always take in information.
Yeah, or I think also, if you see inconsistencies in prescribing among any doctors, it would also be important to report that to the Board of Pharmacy. Any regulation is only as good as its enforcement. And so if we don't know that there's a problem that exists in the community out there, we can't really take action to be able to address it. Mm-hmm.
To what extent have you two have done a great job of presenting to us in a half an hour? To what extent have you packaged this and sent it to all churches, all nonprofits, all the corporate community in Central Ohio? It seems to me like you've got to take this at a very rapid rate to the people, and just the two of you can't do that. So let's make a video of this and send it out.
Get around.
Yeah, thank you, first of all. And, I think that's the hard part, right, is making sure the education's where it needs to be. We're in a position where we started these subcommittees, we have our groups, but it's all about trying to figure out the best route to educate the community. So that's what this Corporate Advisory Council is really going to work heavily on, is public education. We have a business that's willing to take a big role in that, so I'm very excited about and looking forward to that as well. And once we get our feet wet and underway, that's when we want to start expanding to other counties. So I really appreciate that, and I'll let my boss know that you mentioned it. Thank you.
Is there more of a consensus on treatment options? And I ask that because we have a sheriff over in Southwest Ohio who won't let his deputies carry Narcan. We have judges that don't agree with Suboxone and methadone as treatment. I mean, it seems like there's a dispute about the best way to treat. Is that starting to come into focus better?
I know who you mean. It's, when I worked at the state, it was really hard to hear this messaging about, I won't carry Suboxone, let them die, I don't like Suboxone, I don't like Vivitrol. At the end of the day, we can worry about Franklin County, and the messaging here is that treatment is individualized. What Vivitrol may work in some situations, Suboxone may work in some situations. It really just depends on what that person's individualized needs are. So to straight answer your question, absolutely not. No, I think that what we need is some more information to keep coming out as far as, treatment advances, which it is. Not too long ago we were hearing about implants and, good things of that nature, talking about, buprenorphine and other things. And when I say buprenorphine and Suboxone and Vivitrol, those are all medications to help stop, people who are addicted to heroin and other opiates. Those medications help those cravings. We didn't get into that today, but you're going to have judges and other individuals with different philosophies about those medications. You're going to have individuals have different philosophies about naloxone. That's the hard part about this disease. It is so individualized. But until something is mandated, we're not going to have an individual, or this ability, to mandate anything for everybody to have to do. I mean, it's just going to be up to whatever jurisdiction, since Ohio's home rule.
I also just want to say on that note that what we know about addiction has changed rapidly, just even in the last 5 years. And so our treatment has had to change and evolve with that. And there's a lot of stigma and a lot of confusion, especially because what we know about addiction has been constantly evolving. And so, you know, I see a lot of people around this room right here that probably are able to have a conversation and get this information out there. And I think, you know, you hit the nail on the head where we have to really, it can't just be two people sharing this information. So we're relying on you, and you're hopefully able to rely on us to do our best work. Yeah.
One of the comments was that the addictions with opioids many times starts with prescription. But is marijuana a gateway drug to that escalating high or not, from your department's perspective?
Repeat the question.
So the question was about marijuana being a gateway drug, and I think what we know is that any substance or activity or behavior can be psychologically addictive. Marijuana doesn't have the physical addiction properties the same way that an opiate drug does, or any other psychoactive substance. And so, you know, the danger of marijuana is you're typically dealing with a drug dealer. You're encountering someone who's selling a drug illicitly and possibly at higher risk of encountering other types of drugs through that interaction. But yeah, I mean, certainly any substance, you know, food can be addictive. There's lots of different types of addiction. So I think, is that it? Or
one more. That was a quick.
Okay. Well, who hasn't? How about you, sir?
Okay. You held up a little packet about putting it in the nose.
Yes.
Everybody in this room can react if somebody has a heart attack. Mm-hmm. There are plenty of people, because a lot of us have had it either at work, we've had experience with it, or have gotten the training to do it. Mm-hmm. What I ask is what you just did. I never heard of that before. Most of the people think of it sticking somebody with a needle. Right. Putting that up the nose is a lot easier on the individual that's doing it. Yeah. That's my first part of my answer. The second part is, why don't the pharmaceutical companies pay for that, where you can pick it up for free, because they're the ones that made all the profit on it. My third thing is what happens is with that is, how much does it really cost to make what you just held up? How many pennies does that cost? That's what I would find out, because you can go to somebody and say, okay, you're not going to make any profit off of this, and this is your cost on it.
I don't know how much it costs to make. Number two, why won't the pharmaceutical companies pay for it? The City of Columbus, and this is public information, has a lawsuit against the drug companies, the manufacturers, and the distributors. I can't comment on any specifics of the lawsuit other than the fact that we have this lawsuit. So we will see how it ends up. You know, it's certainly interesting to me and good to know, you know, good for our position to know that you did not know about naloxone. It's definitely something that we need to think about, you know, in our roles. So that's good information. You know, but as far as, you know, your ability to get access to it, you know, it just goes back to, you know, what Melissa had said. You can get it with your prescription with insurance. You know.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Melissa, for helping us to understand this important question a lot better than at the beginning of the meeting. As I said, you never know what you're going to learn at a Rotary meeting, but you will learn something. We hope to see you again next Monday. We're going to have Linda Logan, and she is with the Greater Columbus Sports Commission, and she's going to talk to us about Columbus hosting the NCAA Women's Basketball Final Four here this spring. So it's going to be a very great topic. We hope you can join us again. Thank you.